Good morning, everyone, and thanks for coming. We're here today for the NVAR contract updates that went into effect January 1st of this year, 2026. We're here. I'm Steve Lefave. I'm one of the Virginia brokers. I'm sitting here with our managing broker for Virginia, Mike Briggs. So we're going to go over what changes have come out here effective January 1st. And if you've been in business for a while, you know over the last couple of years, the changes have been fast and furious. So you can take a deep breath because it's not so bad this year. So a couple things, a new form, and you guys will all be ready to roll for 2026. Mike, do you have any comments?
Nope. Thanks for leading off, Steve, and let's kick it off.
All right. So NVAR updates effective January 1st. The first one is with the residential sales contract. So this is our main document right here. Nothing too heavy to talk about other than the fact that they've made a few updates. The first one is in paragraph 9 in your contract. So you have to go all the way to paragraph 9 in order to get your first update, which they updated the last sentence in the property maintenance and conditions paragraph to state buyer will conduct final walkthrough or throughs within 7 days prior to settlement or occupancy, whichever occurs first. This is to take the pre-settlement occupancy situation into account. So if there's a pre-settlement agreement associated with the contract that you're writing, hopefully not, then you can do a walkthrough 7 days prior to the initiation of that pre-settlement occupancy agreement.
Walkthrough or walkthroughs, plural, but don't try to take advantage of that as a buyer agent, but it does allow for more than one if need be.
And we do get calls a lot of the times where agents call and say, hey, I'm trying to do a walkthrough, and it's within that 7-day period of time, and they're saying the seller is pushing back regarding walkthroughs. Even though it says that you're entitled to do a walkthrough within 7 days, you still have to figure out a time that's convenient to all parties, right? So sometimes you can't just dictate, I'm going to do it Thursday, and you're going to let it happen, right? It doesn't
plan ahead.
So
especially if there's a tenant in the property, which is not that common, but it does happen going into closing.
Right. And then a lot of times on the buyer side, when you're doing a post-settlement occupancy with the seller, sometimes the sellers don't realize they have to do a walkthrough prior to settlement. So just plan ahead, make sure that that's all scheduled early enough so that the seller's not finding out 2 days before settlement that someone has to come walk through the house and they're not ready for that. So in this business, right, it's all about planning ahead, be ready, okay?
It seems like a lot of listing agents out there haven't grasped that, that the contract does allow for, it's not the day of closing only or the day before. And it shouldn't be, in my opinion. I think it's best for all parties to do it earlier in case there's any issues. And then the buyer agent and the buyer can come back again the day of closing if they need to, or the night before. So
the next change doesn't come again until paragraph 27 in the definitions paragraph. So the paragraph 27, they added clarification to definitions paragraph that ratification can occur anytime between 12 a.m. and 11:59 p.m. on the delivery date and defined the documents notice voiding contract and notice removing financing contingency. So they made those changes, right? So now you can ratify. I think the reason Mike and I were talking about the reason why they added the terms in regards to when the actual contract's ratified is because some people were saying that if it's ratified after 9 o'clock, it doesn't get ratified till the next day. That's not true. If it's ratified, if it's signed by all parties at 10 p.m., it's ratified that day.
That was never true.
Right.
Ratification is the date and time that it's delivered to all parties.
Correct.
Yeah.
And then last, but not...
definition still.
Oh, yeah.
You want to real quick touch on notice voiding?
Oh, sorry.
Item J.
Go ahead.
So I'm not sure what's on the screen, but in the definitions paragraph, item J, they've also clarified that notice voiding contract means specifically the NVAR form that's available to all of us, K1367, entitled Notice Voiding Contract, and they're defining notice removing financing contingency, meaning that form K1331. And when we get to the next segment on financing contingencies, you'll see why this is important. So it used to be really that, like, to void the contract, all you really needed to do was to send, like, any notice. It could be perhaps even an email, as long as it was referencing the section of the contract, the contingency or the right that the buyer had to void the contract. That's all that was really required. Now they're taking it a step forward, saying these forms are specifically required. What's next?
So this is just the verbiage that they added in there for the ratification. I just drilled down on it. So it just talks about the ratification, means the delivery. That's how it's defined in paragraph A. And then also in the additions paragraph, they added the sale of property subject to a lease addendum. So that's a new form that they created this year, which would we'll go into further down in the presentation, but that's added in here as well. They also removed there was an addendum for an extension of the HOA condo review period documents. They removed that because that form is now is obsolete or removed, because you have the right in the contract now to put whatever number of days you want. So there's no need for that extension. Unless you actually need an extension, you could just write that out on an addendum, right?
It's a reflection of a change in Virginia law, which was July of 2024 or
2025, or when did
they changed it at one point to say that the cancellation right of the buyer under the POA or the condo could be extended from 3 to up to 7 days. That was what it was. Well, then that all went away and it got changed again in the code, meaning the buyer and the seller can agree in the contract to have any number of days for that cancellation right, or effectively 0 days for it too.
Correct.
So, and that was why they changed the contract, that paragraph. So,
right. Next on the docket is the a change to the conventional financing contingency, VA financing contingency, FHA financing contingency, and the USDA financing contingencies. So they made the same changes to all of these documents. We're only going to pop up here one of those 4 documents, which is the conventional financing and appraisal contingency. So the first thing is they added language that buyer must deliver notice voiding the contract with denial letter. So the verbiage actually in the contract itself says buyer may void contract by delivering to seller a notice voiding the contract and lender rejection letter for the specified financing anytime prior to the satisfaction or removal of this contingency or expiration of the settlement date, right? So there's been a myriad of things happening over the past couple years in regards to notification regarding removal of the financing contingency. So they just kind of tightened the language up to help us.
if I'll add, previously it just said you could deliver a lender denial letter, period. It was that simple. So it didn't require the notice voiding contract. That was not in the contingency language previously. All you really needed to do was to deliver the loan denial letter and the contract would become void at that point. But now it specifically requires the buyer and the buyer agent to deliver both and that specific form.
Correct. They also made a change, adding language that the buyer must deliver notice, removing the financing contingency with either a commitment letter or evidence of funds available to close without financing in order to remove the financing contingency. So you can't just send over a notice to remove the financing contingency without some sort of document that shows that the buyer has the funds to close or the lender has provided you with loan commitment. And here's what the paragraph actually says. Buyer may satisfy this contingency by delivering to seller a notice removing financing contingency and written loan commitment from the lender or lenders to which buyer has applied for specified financing or evidence of the availability of funds necessary to settle without such financing anytime prior to the removal of this contingency or expiration of the settlement date. So now you have to provide both those. Now, we all know that no one ever removes this financing contingency, right? So if you
It's
have,
rare, put it that way.
if you have a financing contingency with automatic extension, it's very hard to get the other side to remove it. So
Unless the seller pulls a trigger on you, right? Listing agent and the seller. There's a form for that. For those of you who don't know, it's, what do they call that one? Notice requesting or request to remove financing contingency. Right. And that's pretty rare too, that a seller and listing agent choose to pull the trigger on the buyer and send that. But it can happen. And if that happens, then the buyer agent and the buyer have 3 days.
3 days.
And if they were going to void, they would still need to follow these procedures.
Right.
Otherwise, the contract would remain in full force and effect.
Correct.
Without the contingency anymore. So
I'm going to spin this around so you.
It's okay.
Okay. All right. Next on the docket is notice removing financing contingency. So this is just a one-pager. Notice removing financing contingency. They added the form back. So this is added back to the library with language consistent with updates above, with the that are related to the financing contingency above. So they just put this back in the library. It used to be part of that one big addendum that we had, that you could remove the contingency for a home inspection, for all those different things that you had. Now it has its own. It has its own again, which it used to be that way before. So we're going forward and backwards and then forward again. So this is a copy of the form. You're really just going to check the appropriate box that you're attaching a loan commitment letter or evidence of the available funds necessary to settle without such financing. So you can't. So the big thing from this is you cannot remove the financing contingency without one of these two documents. So our understanding from NVAR is the reason behind this is for the protection of the seller. So keep that in
Another
mind.
comment on the loan denial letters, because this comes up, and there's no definition of what the lender denial letter must look like, really. Most of us who've been around with a buyer who's needed to get out of the contract because of financing denial, or listing agent who's suffered through that, a deal falling apart. We are accustomed to seeing the standard Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac statement of credit denial or change document. That's a long-running standardized form that was probably published by Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac. It's also typically provided with HUD, FHA deals, and VA. It is the standard, but the contract never has and still doesn't require that form be provided. And sometimes we get into a dispute when the classic example is, can a loan officer, the loan officer themselves, send an email at the last minute on the day of closing or whatever saying, sorry to say, we're not able to do this loan. It should say the specified financing, because that's defined in the contingency. It says that it has to be a lender denial and it says letter, but lender denial, I think, for the specified financing. Well, what does that mean? Really, technically, what it means is that it should include the type of loan, conventional, FHA, VA, USDA, whatever it is, the loan amount, a loan amount applied for, or really the loan amount that's in the contract. So loan to value, and then also the interest rate. Those are all components of specified financing. And those are items that are included on page 1 of the contract in the price and financing term. And then in the contingency addendum, it talks about interest rate and like 30-year amortization versus adjustable rate. So theoretically, if it was a loan officer sending an email, or it was a letter that was not the letter from the lender, not on that standardized form, whether it was signed or not, as long as it addressed the specified financing components, I've always been of the opinion that that qualifies because the contract doesn't say otherwise. As long as the buyer sends that and the notice voiding contract, that specific form, they should be good. But we've seen disputes where they're like, no, because in practice, the truth is loan officers are not typically authorized to deny the loan themselves. That's an underwriting thing, underwriter or senior management with the mortgage company. But they are a representative of the lender. And so I can see that being legitimate. Okay?
So, Mike, if I send a loan denial from a lender that I didn't provide the approval letter from, does that mean I can't get out on specified financing?
So that's a darn good question. See, he's trying to trip me up here. I mean, there's an alternative financing paragraph. The contract requires the buyer to make loan application within 7 days following ratification. And so if they've jumped lenders, and they've made full loan application with more than one lender, and then they're trying to get a loan denial from that second or third lender down the road, it's only valid if they can document that they made full loan application within the 7 days following ratification.
Thanks. All right, so we covered 3 different documents so far. Does anybody have any questions on any of those 3 documents that we covered so far? Please. All right. Hold on a second. Here comes the mic for you.
Ken Hike from the McLean office.
Hi, Ken.
Are you on? Mic on, John? Okay.
Quick question. If notice, though, is actually a legal concept, the fact that this contract says you have to use that specified form is one thing. But if actual notice is provided, has it been vetted in the form change through the legal analysis that that's insufficient to provide actual notice that's not on that form?
Well, I know I know what you're talking about, right? We've had times where the lender will send the commitment letter over to the listing agent directly, and we'll find out later on that the lender theoretically on the other contracts took care of that requirement by sending the commitment letter directly to the listing agent. They didn't send it through us as the buyer agent, and we didn't provide it with the actual notice removing the financing contingency. But I think the thing to be clear here is it now says that in order to remove it, right, the buyer must deliver notice removing the financing contingency with either commitment letter or evidence of funds. So I believe the new notice or the new contract says that you have to provide the notice along with the commitment letter.
So the answer is, I think you asked, has it been vetted? This is a new change. Is there any precedent on this? Not yet. This specifically, that the form must accompany it. This specific form must accompany it. You know, if it ended up going before a judge one day and the lender, like Steve said, it's unusual for a buyer's loan officer to send a loan denial letter directly to the listing agent. If I was a buyer agent, I sure wouldn't want that to happen without me being aware of it, right? But regardless, a judge could rule on that and say a loan denial is a loan denial. Get over it. You agreed to a financing contingency, but NVAR, these contract documents they've evolved over decades, and they're more sophisticated than some contract forms that are like even the Virginia Realtors forms. NVAR, it's more specific, and it was all voted on by Standard Forms Committee members, board of directors at NVAR, with the input and advice of the attorney advisory group to NVAR. They do have a round table of 10 or 12 attorneys, local real estate attorneys, one of whom is our in-house counsel, and he's chairman of that right now, the attorney advisory group for NVAR. What's that? You can email me.
All right, in the back.
Good morning. Am I on?
Yep.
Okay. So when we used to do this, when this form was in play prior to them pulling it, now bringing it back, ran into a lot of confusion over what constitutes a written loan commitment, because the contract doesn't define that. And the industry, if you talk to lenders, they'll largely say, well, yeah, that's what we provide once it's fully underwritten and so forth. So if you're trying to get this removal,
Yeah.
and you have this ambiguous what constitutes a loan commitment, I used to get a lot of pushback from agents, or, gee, we can't give that to you right away. The lender won't give that to us. And the other part of that is, okay, well, I can get a loan commitment, but it's conditioned. So
It's always
does that-
conditional, right? Always.
Right. So does that remove the contingency just because it's a written loan commitment? It could be, 19 different conditions, or does that create some kind of gray area that people might push back on? So it's the whole thing about the written loan commitment being the standard, but not really having a standard of what that is.
Well, I think the financing contingency addendum itself says once the contingency is removed, it notifies that the buyer, their earnest money deposit could be at risk, right? So if they do send over a loan commitment with conditions, then I would interpret that as potentially they're removing the contingency. They're aware of those conditions, yet they're removing the contingency.
Isn't that why? That's why they brought the form back.
Correct.
Notice removing financing contingency. So if you're a listing agent, I think I'm getting your question that it used to be, again, once the buyer delivers a quote unquote commitment letter, that by itself, in and of itself, removed the financing contingency, regardless of some other addendum or notice saying, hey, I'm removing my contingency. That commitment letter, which you're right, is always subject to final underwriting the day of closing. And we don't, as listing agents, we don't know what the conditions are unless we ask, and if the buyer authorizes the lender to disclose very specifically what are those outstanding underwriting conditions. But if I'm a listing agent and because the listing agents are pressing the buyer always, you should be, to remove that contingency, right?
And that's where the difficulty was.
Yeah.
It was, well, I can't get that. The lender won't give that to me yet. And it just delayed the removal.
To answer specifically, I think if it says commitment, I always said, if it says commitment on it, like on top, commitment, that would serve the purpose. I don't care about any other conditions at all. But when you see pre-approval or
Condition.
if it says conditional commitment, I think that qualifies too.
But
It says commitment on it.
It's
Commitment.
not going to satisfy the removal, is what I'm kind of thinking. If I get something wishy-washy and the notice,
Yeah.
the wishy-washy could potentially not satisfy the removal.
Yeah. Well, it's always going to be wishy-washy, and deals are never done until they're done. And some attorney told me that contracts are only as good as the paper they're written on and the intentions of the parties. So there's only so much control we can have as a listing agent. But just become familiar with the form and the specific language in the financing contingency as to what is the prescribed required procedure.
You had a question, Angela?
Yeah, I just want to know if this affects say if we went under ratified contract for our listing prior to January 1st, do we have to still provide this form?
No.
Okay.
You operate from the documents and contract that you're ratified with.
And Beck.
I had the same listing agent question, but also now as a buyer's agent, since the financial denial letter needs to be very specific to the terms of the contract, what is your current broker recommendation for filling in that blank for the interest rate for our buyers?
We talked about this with the Shannon Lauderstein, the new director of broker outreach with NVAR, who who was here a few weeks back to do a little mini presentation to us brokers, managing brokers, and this subject came up a little bit. It has always been a source of confusion and honestly continues to be. Steve, I'll let you take it from there.
Well, I'll start off with things that you shouldn't put in there. Market rate, TBD, blank. I always, when I fill it out, I always look and see what the current interest rate is, market rate today. So say the market rate today is 6%. I normally talk to my clients and I say, hey, interest rate is 6%. Have they quoted you an interest rate yet? If they say no, then I use 6%. If they say yes and they tell me what that rate is, I put that rate into the contract. No fudge factor. Why? Because it's beneficial.
If rates rise,
Yeah, it's
You're
beneficial to my client, who's the buyer, that if the rates change in an upward direction, they have a mode to void the contract based on specified financing. So I see them as listing agents all the time, Contracts come in and say market rate, which means it could be 6% today and 10 tomorrow. Well, that's the market rate. Guess what? They can't get out of the contract based on the interest rate rise. So protect your buyers.
if you're a listing agent and you see an interest rate entered in that is way lower than market or what you believe to be market, you might want to question that or counter it.
For sure.
You can counter that as a seller, listing agent seller, to make it a little bit higher so that there's a little bit, of a cushion, because they might not qualify at 5.5, but 5.5 might not be available without a couple of points. That's another question there. It's hard to know. Does that mean that interest rate with no points? What we call par, the par rate, 0 points, discount points.
Right.
I always believe that it should. It doesn't exactly say that, but an interest rate should be an interest rate without additional buy down cost. Any other question on that?
There was another question over on this section over here. I saw a hand. You still have it? You're good? Okay. He's good. All right. So we're going to move on. If no questions on those related documents. Next form on the docket is the sale of property subject to a lease addendum. So this is a brand new form added to the library. Well-needed form. If you've ever done a contract on a property that has a lease already currently on it, right? So most of the time it's for an investor client. They're buying a property, it's already occupied by a tenant.
Yeah, it's way overdue. We're glad to see this. Do you remember if I ever put mine into the Samson Skyslope library? I have one that I created years and years ago. I did what we're not supposed to do and practice law without a license by drafting this form.
He didn't say that on camera.
And that was before AI, right?
We'll scrub that.
But I haven't done it yet, but I'm gonna compare those mine versus this, because I should have done it before today. But this has some really good points in it. Mine also has a couple of additional things that this doesn't have. So this has some things that I didn't have, and mine has a couple things that this doesn't. And I wrote mine more with an eye towards being the buyer agent, protecting the buyer who is taking title to a property subject to an existing lease. Obviously, that could be an investor buyer. Maybe that's most common, but a lot of times we see these deals where the buyer wants to close and needs to close, and the tenant isn't going to get out for another week or 2 weeks or a month or whatever, and the buyer's okay with that. So obviously that creates risk for the buyer. And
that's not a condition for a seller's post-settlement occupancy agreement, right? A lot of people use them for this situation when a tenant is occupying the property and maybe they're going to move out in a month, and we use a seller's post-settlement occupancy agreement. A seller's post-occupancy agreement is for a seller, Okay, so this document now would be used if you have a property and your buyer is taking possession. However, the tenant would be in the property for a month, a year, whatever those terms are. This would be the document to use.
One of the big differences that's popped into my brain with the one I have, and if anybody wants it, you can email me, and I'll send it to you. So you could, I wrote mine with the option, I think, for it to be a contingency. This document right here is not exactly a contingency for the buyer at the time of ratification. I had written mine saying that it is contingent upon the listing agent and the seller delivering to the buyer within X number of days of ratification, copy of the lease, copy of the rental application that the landlord has for that tenant, assuming they've got one, that they got when that tenant moved in. Because if I'm the buyer and this person's going to be in the house forever, whether I'm an investor or I'm not an investor, I want to know what their rental application looks like, not just the lease, right? So it can be modified such that it is a contingency. I mean, this document is good. Were you going to get into it at all?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so the top part is really just a standard boilerplate for the seller, for all the parties. Paragraph 1 is the lease term. This goes into the current terms of the lease that's currently in place with the tenants, what their rent is, and if they're currently up on their payments. So that's a good thing to know, right? If they're 2 months in the rears on their mortgage payment or their rent payment, you'd like to know that, right? Paragraph 2 is it calls for you to get a copy of the lease. If it's not provided prior to ratification, then it defines that it's supposed to be provided within 2 days of the execution of this addendum. So maybe you didn't provide this addendum at settlement and you do it afterwards and it gets signed. Now you're entitled to a copy of that lease within 2 days.
But it doesn't say that rental application.
It doesn't.
I mean, if I'm a buyer, I want the Social Security number. That's a controversial subject among some, about realtors, sharing a Social Security number, redacting it from any document, that sort of thing. And yeah, we got to be careful. We don't want to be emailing a rental application that has the tenant's name, address, Social Security number, and signature on it. So those are touchy subjects, but if you're a buyer, you want to know who is their emergency point of contact, how many vehicles they got, what are they, how many kids, all that additional information besides what's in that lease.
Right. And on the protective side, we talked a little bit about this when the attorney was here for NVAR. On the protective side, having been a property manager, as far as tenants go, I wouldn't, like people have talked about, uploading that document in the document section in Bright. I wouldn't do that.
Right.
I would maybe only provide that document once you have a buyer that has no contingencies left on their contract and it looks like they're going to settlement. Then I might provide with the tenant's acknowledgement as well. I would email the tenant as the listing agent or the seller and say, hey, we got a new landlord coming in. We're going to provide them with a copy of your rental application from when you applied for the property. So just so that you're aware that we're providing that as a contractual obligation to this contract. So you've notified the tenant, they know, now you send it over to the buyer, they have it, they can move forward and do their thing.
So this says that the seller's agreeing to provide a copy of the lease,
Right.
and any addenda within 2 days of ratification or execution of this document, which presumably would coincide with
Right.
ratification of the contract. But as Steve said, you wouldn't be providing that rental application. You're not required to under this, but if you're a buyer agent, I would want it. And you just know that my point is, these documents are written. NVAR, they do the best they can, forms committees to create these documents that are useful for both sides. They're not written by an attorney for the buyer only, or for the seller, landlord, seller, whatever. So there's a limit as to what these things can do if you're really trying to go the extra mile to protect the best interests of your client. Keep that in mind. talk with your client, because you could modify this or add additional language on an addendum. I think it should have had additional terms section or something on it, but it all, so that you could, like I said earlier, if the buyer wanted to make it a contingency, because I might not want to go through with the deal until I know a little bit more about that tenant, besides just what's in the lease.
All right, paragraph 3 goes on to contract provisions modified. So this modifies a couple of the sales contract provisions. Paragraph A is the property maintenance and condition inspection. So what this does is removes the requirement for the property be free and clear of trash and debris and broom cleaned at the time of settlement. It also allows reasonable access, or defines reasonable access in regards to the new buyer getting access to the property. And it still leaves the listing agent and the seller in charge of creating any appointments that need to be made to have access to that property. So a lot of times what you'll see is they'll put it off to you. They'll say, hey, can you call the tenant and make your arrangements to go see the property whenever your buyer is ready. Here it outlines that it's supposed to be still coordinated through the listing side.
And that's state law, really. Virginia Residential Landlord Tenant Act kind of defines what is reasonable access for any landlord. The current landlord or this incoming buyer, you can't just force your way in there. And the tenant's rights are not superseded by this contract or this document. So be respectful of the tenant. Hopefully they'll cooperate,
And then it also alters the possession date language to say that the seller transfer of possession of the property at settlement to the buyer will be non-exclusive and subject to the rights of the tenant to occupy the property pursuant to the lease. Buyer will be responsible for the performance of all landlord obligations under the lease from and after such date. And then paragraph 4 is seller obligations. The seller agrees to complete the following action on or before settlement. A is provide written notice to the tenant of the sale of the property. Well, that's a no-brainer, right? We would hope that occurs. Provide notice to the property manager, if any, of the sale of the property. C, provide tenant with written notice of the new location of security deposit in accordance with lease and Virginia law. And also transfer any prorated rent at settlement, security deposit, thereon to the buyer. So
what I think would have been an improvement on this, they didn't ask me before they published it, but was that, where it says these are seller obligations, seller will provide written notice to the tenant, blah, blah, blah. I think it should have said, and will provide copy of such notice to the buyer agent, so
they know it's done.
Yeah.
Seller will remain responsible for the obligations of the lease and the Virginia Residential Landlord Tenant Act through settlement. Seller accepts, as outlined hereof, shall not make any modifications, amendments, extensions, or renewals to the lease through settlement without the written agreement of the buyer. And then paragraph 5 is assignment of the lease. Seller hereby assigns, transfers, and conveys all of the seller's rights, responsibilities, benefits, and interest, and under the lease for the property to the extent assignable and transfer to buyer. At settlement, buyer accepts such assignment and agrees to be substituted in place of the seller as landlord to lease upon settlement. Now, it's nice that that's in there, but as a new landlord, you would probably want to create something for the tenant once you take possession of the property.
But I think it's important to point out, as a buyer agent, there's no requirement. The incoming buyer who's going to be a landlord, whether it's for another year or for a week or 2 weeks or whatever it is, that incoming buyer who's going to be the new landlord by law and by this contract cannot insist on a new lease.
Right.
So sometimes they think they can. It's like, no, I want my own lease. Well, you're accepting an assignment of the existing lease, then that's
right.
tenant is under no further obligation other than to pay the rent to where you've designated now.
Yeah, or you can also do a lease addendum that changes who the landlords are, who's got, if they didn't do that, the security deposit, where the rent's supposed to go, contacts for each party so that they know who to call if they do have a problem with the property. So your buyer can do that as well, and hopefully the tenants would sign that. Or you could do it in a notice. Right.
That's true. A landlord can always unilaterally redirect. Hey, make your payments to this bank account now, not that one. So that's not something that the tenant would have the right to object to. It's just the fundamental terms of the lease. Otherwise, they can't be forced to change.
Any questions on this form? We did such a great job. There's no questions. Woohoo, baby. Way to go, Mike.
Yeah.
I knew I asked him to do this with me for a reason.
Appreciate the invite.
All right, next is the lead-based paint disclosure. It changed for both the sale and the rental listing side of the equation. So we're all familiar with this document, right? So the changes here are outlined here in the purchaser's acknowledgement, and what they added here is the highlighted yellow thing under purchaser's initials. They added, they have been advised that seller has no knowledge, information, reports, or records pertaining to lead-based paint and or lead-based paint hazards in the house. So I guess before, the purchaser or the tenant only had initialed or checked a box for they've received and had the opportunity to review copies of all information listed above, which if there wasn't any, then there was nothing to review. So now they actually have to check a box that says there was no information, and they understand there's no information.
Clean up on the form.
Yeah. The other thing is they added a little bit of extra stuff into the sales agent's acknowledgments. So the listing, they changed the listing agent.
Selling agent.
And the buyer agent, they changed the buyer agent to the selling agent to the buyer.
Yeah.
So that was confusing, right?
A lot of times agents confuse us when they call and they say, I'm the selling agent. I'm like, are you the buyer agent? Yeah. Oh, no, I'm the listing agent. Well, it's okay. You're the seller's agent, not the selling agent. And by the way, everybody, those of you who don't know the form, the disclosure is only applicable to properties that were built prior to 78, not 1978, before 78. So 77 or earlier.
Correct.
77 or early.
77,
Yeah.
76, 75, 74, 73.
I don't know where 69 came from. Yeah. And as the form calls for, the buyer and seller or landlord and tenant and both agents have to sign this form. That's federal law. Okay.
Yep. All right. Next form on the docket, the optional listing information sheet, which I think a lot of people use today, and upload it into their document section in the Bright listing. But all they really did to this form was they added this one circled line up here at the top, which says submit offers to, and what email address and name of the person that you're submitting. So I guess before it was ambiguous, so now it's not. So we are smarter to know where we're sending our offers to.
And this is different than the delivery language that's in your contract, okay? This is submission of the offer.
Right.
That paragraph that's in the contract is typically for deliveries post-ratification.
Yep. I think a lot of this has to do with the booming of teams lately, right? So you have these teams that are all popping up all over the place.
TCs.
And right. And you send, you send it to the listing agent as per the listing, right? The MLS listing. And then all of a sudden you send it, and then they then you're like, hey, I sent you the our contract to your email address. Oh, don't send your contracts there. Didn't you see buried in my agent remark somewhere that it said send all offers to whatever? Oh, I didn't see that, right? And now you've sent your contract somewhere else,
Meanwhile, you lost it because somebody else got
right?
got in.
Hopefully not. I was being positive. I was being positive. Don't.
Keep being positive, man. I love that about you.
All right. Thank you, sir. The next form is the exclusive right to represent buyer agreement. If you haven't drafted one of these here since January 1st, this may be the first time you're seeing this. It's not a monumental change, but there are a few small changes to this form. The first one is on paragraph 8, compensation. So before, I guess people were writing in too many crazy things in paragraph 8. So they have streamlined this to a point where they say, hey, we're not going to let you write in crazy stuff in here anymore. So these boxes are either numbers or numbers. So you can no longer write in
Tenants or numbers.
numbers or numbers.
Numbers are numbers. Okay.
So you can't put in other stuff in here. And as per the NAR settlement, we shouldn't be putting in other stuff in here anymore, right? So I've been trying to catch you when I can, as per this, as per the seller in the contract, doesn't work for this paragraph, right? We have to define what we expect to make in compensation. So paragraph 1, if we're charging a straight percentage, you would put that there. If you're charging a dollar amount, say a flat fee, $10,000, $20,000, $100 million, whatever that number is, you would put in the next slot. If you're charging a combination of fees, so I'm charging a percentage and maybe I have a team fee, or I have, I'm just a good looking guy fee, whatever fee you might have in there to add into your
Priceless, man.
thank you, sir. So you may add that in there. So we would prefer, if you're adding in the brokerage fee, that you put that in the next page, the brokerage fee slot. But some people probably will still add it in here, which is okay. It could be in the last paragraph.
You don't want both.
Right.
So the message there is the Samson Properties 395 fee goes down in 8C.
8C.
8C. Always. Like Steve said, we're still going to see it probably in this paragraph. But really what we're saying is, your team fee, TC fee, marketing fee, staging fee, any of these additional processing fees that you can justify, negotiate with your client for value-added service, put it in that third checkbox. So like 2.5% of gross sales price, or 3% or 4% of gross sales price plus that fee. And then have 395 down. Don't gloss over it. The idea is you're supposed to go through this form with your clients. But as long as it's in there, and they sign the agreement. But some of them are going to focus on this section, the top part of the primary part of compensation, and they may gloss over 8C. We don't want the 395 brokerage service fee being portrayed as anything other than what it is, and we have that separate form for that. Brokerage Service Fee Explained, which is a good form to have signed in addition to your brokerage agreement, listing agreement, or buyer agency agreement. Get that signed. It's not an absolute requirement as long as you've got it in the brokerage agreement. But if you don't have it in one or the other, accounting is going to take it from your commission if you don't collect it from the client. Okay.
And we are finding some title companies are asking for our brokerage agreements. So we get a call probably once a month from an agent asking, hey, the title company is asking me for a copy of the brokerage agreement. Why are they asking? Most likely because we've added fees on there like the $395 fee, and we're not settling with Cardinal. we're settling somewhere else. They just want to see, maybe the buyer is pushing back on that number, so they just want to see what the obligation is for that $395 fee. So if you don't have it in your buyer agency agreement and you're charging the client, they may take it off, and then you may have to absorb that when they cut your.
Don't freak out over it. It is something that increasingly has been requested by title companies, sometimes by the lender, right?
Yep, on occasion.
And, while you as the agent should probably get a quick email or text to and from your client that, hey, this is being requested, I recommend we go ahead and comply with their request. No downside, but I want you to be aware and to consent that I'm about to send our brokerage agreement over to your lender, or to the title company. Don't get hung up on it. What's the big deal, right?
All right. And then seeing that we've been talking about the compensation paragraph, right? So these fields are now, you can't put any letters in there. So you can't write, the seller or paid through the contract or whatever like that. I just want to direct most of us to this bolted language that's been in the contract, in this agreement for a while now. It says, if the buyer receives any compensation from the seller or the seller's representative for services covered by agreement, that amount will be credited towards the buyer's obligation to pay broker compensation. So there is language in here that protects your buyer client, that whatever you write in the sales contract is going to be deducted from this amount. So
And this is not new,
no,
but it's good that it's in bold.
yes. So if I'm asking, NVAR, they always talk chickens, right? So if I'm asking for 2.5 chickens, and during the negotiation of the sale, I only get 2 chickens. Well, the buyer owes me a half a chicken. Well, that's a mess, right? You cut a chicken in half. No, it's not funny. I tried. But if you don't want to charge your client that extra half of chicken, right? Just use the buyer representation agreement.
Broker
Representation agreement. Yeah. And reduce your commission from 2.5 to 2 or chickens. And I would make it address specific. So that way, if your buyer voids that contract somewhere along the line, that you go back to the original terms of the buyer broker agreement. So you can do that and talk to your client about that so that they're not nervous. A lot of the extra stuff we write in this agreement is because we're not explaining this form to our clients well enough. So explain it to them, let them know they're covered, and let them understand during the negotiation of the sales contract, the commission is going to come up. It's up to them to decide at that point whether or not they want to move forward and come up with a solution in order to make the deal work, as we always do as real estate agents, right? So I just wanted to bring that up, seeing that we were talking about it, just because the question arises quite often.
There are occasions when the listing agent and the seller might counter that seller paid buyer broker compensation
Yes.
in the price and financing section of page 1 of the contract, just because you write in 3% or whatever, 2.5%, 3%. If it's a competitive bid situation or something, they might counter that down. So you're going into the offer with this explanation Steve's talking about with your buyer, talk with them that you're going to do the best you can to get all of this broker compensation that's defined in your brokerage agreement paid by the seller. But if they counter it out or cut it down, your buyer needs to be prepared that you're still looking to get paid the full amount, unless you come to some other agreement with your buyer, but don't feel like that's any obligation of yours. As long as you disclose this and talk about it with your client up front, your buyer has a decision to make. If the seller counters, the seller paid buyer broker compensation, meaning the buyer is going to now have to pay some of our compensation. There's nothing wrong with looking at the buyer and say no, counter it back, or improve your price or something, but keep that commission the way it is supposed to be. The other thing I wanted to say is, earlier when we're talking about whether or not to give up a copy of the buyer agency agreement to the lender or the title company. One of the things you've got to bear in mind is, remember that we're not allowed to have more compensation on that contract coming from the seller than what is in your agreement. So if you're going to turn over your buyer agreement to the settlement company or the lender and it says 2.5, but the seller's paying 3 because that's what you put in your contract, that ain't going to work. It's going to be a gotcha moment.
That's a great point, because right there on your screen in paragraph E, right, 8E, which seems to get overlooked a lot, it says retention of excess compensation. Broker may not receive any compensation, including fees, which exceed the amount set forth in this agreement. So this is already in your agreement. So if you have 2.5% in your buyer brokerage agreement and you're asking for 3 in your contract, guess what? We're only supposed to receive 2.5% as per our brokerage agreement.
And that's not new with this change, but it was new with the NAR
Last August.
settlement. So the changes came last summer.
Yeah.
Was it?
Well, over a year.
No.
2024.
Right, 2024 summer. Yeah.
So
Okay. So don't shortchange yourself in your buyer agency agreements. Know your worth. Put it in there. Make it clear to the buyer that, yes, the buyer's offer is going to, the normal procedure, most common, is that the buyer's asking the seller to pay it as part of their offer. And I'm a broken record with this, but I think it's very good to talk with buyers, certainly listing agents talking to their sellers, to spell it out. The buyer's paying that commission really as much or more than the seller is. Yes, it comes out of the seller's side of the ALTA, out of their proceeds, but it's based on the sales price that buyer's willing to pay, the down payment and loan amount or whatever the buyer's coming up with to satisfy the seller to ratify the contract, meaning the buyer's financing it into that purchase. So that's a good way. Some sellers won't buy it. They'll I'm not paying more than, I'm not paying any, or I'm not paying X. That was what we used to say to FSBOs all the time. If you ever deal with a for sale by owner, explain it that way, because it's real, right?
Right. So, and one other thing to add on to this compensation is we have quite a few agents that are still giving rebates to their buyers. So you could still do that, right? So say you ask in your agreement for you're asking for 3 chickens, right? But you're only going to accept 2 chickens. You're only write that in the other terms, right? So that it's fully explained in regards to how the commission is going to work, right? So that way we don't get a call on the day or 2 before settlement because your buyer's upset because they were expecting a rebate and they're not going to get it. And there's nothing in your brokerage agreement that says anything about a rebate. So make sure if you're giving rebates that you have that in writing somewhere so that there's no ambiguity regarding how much you're expecting to make and how much you're planning to give as a rebate.
And whether it's both subjects, the $395 brokerage service fee and or any rebate, the title companies, including Cardinal, are going to want to see that documented. They got to have it papered. Don't show up at settlement and crying because the title company doesn't have the Samson $395 fee, and you're just catching that now at the last minute. You got to think of it from the title company standpoint. They're working for all parties, and they're not going to put a line item charge to the buyer on the settlement statement without something in writing from the buyer agency agreement or brokerage service fee explained document. Likewise, they're not going to put a realtor credit without our broker commission credit letter signed by a broker.
Yeah. All right. Any questions on this form?
Yes. KDV?
Thank you. On the last page. So what if in the buyer broker for the retention of excess compensation, there is no fee written?
Paragraph E?
Yeah.
Right. May not receive any compensation, including fees, which is brokerage fees. So if you didn't put brokerage fees in here, right? So it's just outlining that you can't ask for more money from the buyer than you put in this contract, that you put in this buyer agreement.
And if we failed to put that fee in the agreement, how do we go back and
You could get an amendment, brokerage representation agreement amendment. That's what the form's for. Any kind of change to the brokerage agreement.
but it's pretty important, so we should do that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Not on this form, though, but
Oh, you're going back in time?
I'm going back.
Oh my God.
You're gonna allow it?
Go ahead. Only because I like you.
I didn't want to spoil the no questions.
Spoiler
I
alert.
have to ask.
But I did.
Yeah. So under the lease addendum, just for clarification, if I'm a buyer tenant, or I'm sorry, buyer investor, and that lease conveys, can I ask for an updated rental application?
You could make that part of your you could attempt to make that part of your contract with the seller, and they would tell you, let me try. Because they can't, under VRLTA and the existing lease, standard form lease, I don't believe there's any provision that a landlord can require an updated rental application during the term of a lease. At renewal, they could, but, and I don't even know, I don't think, do you know if a landlord has the right to run credit again during a lease term?
I mean, they could require it. It could be required. I mean, during lease renewal period. So that part of the negotiation in the lease, it says 60 days prior to the end of the lease term, the seller will initiate contact with, or the landlord will initiate contact with the tenant regarding what they plan to do with the property. So I could call you as a landlord or contact you as a landlord and say, hey, I'm letting you know that we're 60 days out from the end of your lease term. Are you guys planning to stay or vacate or what? Hey, I'd like to stay. I come back and say, hey, I'm going to raise the rent, whatever. And also, I'd like to rerun your rental application because you've been in the property 2 years or 3 years. I'd like to just make sure everything's still copacetic.
That's a really good idea for a landlord, soon to be seller. If they're going to market the property, a lot of people, investors are looking for property with immediate income.
Right.
So for a listing agent to advise their landlord client who's going to be selling to do that proactively is in their best interest. I don't think you can force the tenant, but yeah.
I just want to comment on that. I had that happen to me. I have several investors, and we had that last year. I was with a different brokerage back then, but it was an NDA lawyer that told us, you cannot, because their situation may have changed where they lost their job, and one income is now providing for the rent. But what you said at the end there, that is true. If they're going to renew their lease, you definitely can re-ask. I mean, you might want to check with the lawyers, but that's what I was told. That at the time, the landlord can ask for a new application because it's a new.
Again, if you're the buyer agent, I'm telling you, try to negotiate that going into your offer, make that part of your offer, or make this a contingency, right? So that you can get that information.
Hi, I had the Samson service fee question. Should 8C only say $395?
Brokerage service fee?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, and then if I have to add in the top section additional fees to cover, let's say, my team admin fee,
Yeah.
where or how should that be reflected in the ALTA? Because sometimes they're getting combined as the Samson fee on the ALTA.
We would prefer that it be itemized separately, okay? And the title company should not object. They should cooperate. They work for us on that front, as long as you got the paperwork on it. That would be an example of why they would maybe want a copy of your buyer agency agreement.
I was doing that until they started to write a check separate to my team instead of
No.
Samson. It got messy.
Okay, so good question. There are examples of where you are entitled to get reimbursed directly, separately, for an expenditure. Like if you have paid for staging, you've come out of pocket and you have the ability to provide a receipt, title company can pay you that directly. That's not commission. But these other items that are compensation in the brokerage agreement, that's commission. That's 1099 income that has to come through Samson.
Right.
If it ends up coming through Samson all in one lump sum, our accounting department's going to handle that based on your commission disbursement form. Does that answer?
See, here's where the here's where the confusion comes into from chatting with the NVAR lawyer, right? So in paragraph 8A, if you write in whatever your commission is plus your team fee, okay, theoretically it's commission, okay? Now on your sales contract, you're negotiating a sales contract with commission paid for by the seller. So say in paragraph 8, whatever, A, last paragraph, you have 3 chickens plus $500. Well, you only asked for 3 chickens in the sales contract. You didn't ask for the additional $800. So who's paying that $800? Or whatever that additional amount is. So the settlement company could come back and say, hey, who's paying that $800? Is that coming directly from the buyers? Who's paying for that?
And it would be.
Right. It would be paid.
It says that in the document. Buyer will pay. All of it except that which we get.
So that team fee theoretically should be in the addition. It should be the compensation field, not the brokerage service fee. It should be whatever 3 chickens plus whatever your team fee is, and it should all come to Samson under commission.
It is commission. It's commission whether it's paid by the seller or by the buyer. The only other exception is if you have a legitimate reimbursement. That's when the title company can pay you directly.
Right.
Separate check needs to be itemized on the settlement statement as such. And that's fine.
Yeah, team fees shouldn't be paid directly to the
No, team fees are not. That's different. But let's say you paid to have the place painted. I mean, you had cleaners in there in advance. You paid for it. You have the right. You should itemize it separately and get reimbursed rather than have that come to Samson. You certainly don't want it in your 1099. It's not taxable commission. It's a reimbursement to you.
All right. So
everybody clear on that, right? Okay. So it goes. NVAR was trying to say be careful because they also said it was like she was advocating for the agents, not so much the broker, because they were saying that if you put it in that first section, commission or compensation is 2.5% plus $500. Then all of it could be subject to your split, your commission split with your broker. Do you know what I mean? It's not how we operate here. Whatever that extra amount is, that's yours. We're not, I mean, we're 100% commission anyway, but not all companies are, right? That was part of her point, I think.
yeah.
But at the end, she said, do what you guys want to do. But so the only other place is there is an additional provisions section at the bottom of the form, I think. You can put stuff there. But the easy way, like we're saying, is any additional fees that are not the Samson Properties brokerage service fee will go in that third checkbox line, commission plus X amount.
Right. And you had a question.
Yeah, it seems funny, but if we ask for chicken, receive 2.5 chicken, which means 1 out of million happen, the half a chicken goes to the buyer, right? Credit.
It could, or you could do a brokerage representation agreement amendment to change your compensation from 2 to 2.5.
We can change that, right?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, thank you so much.
Just like we can reduce it, we can increase it.
So this is a prime example of where a benefit from the NAR settlement. A lot of people, were really hypercritical of the whole thing and hypercritical of NAR, and there was some good reasons to be critical. But at the end of the day, transparency with our buyer clients is a good thing, and I don't think it's changed. It hadn't rocked too many worlds so far. It does require a little more education and understanding what you need to share with your buyer at the buyer interview. But buyers have every right to have full clarity on how we work, how we get paid, where's that money coming from, and it is negotiable.
And then so that's it for the NVAR changes. So the only other changes I wanted to bring forward, seeing that they happened so close to January 1st, were the December 10th changes that happened in Bright. So if you weren't aware of that, well, Bright had some updates that went into effect December 10th as well. And they are here listed. The first one is listing photos, right? Control of your listing photos. So you can now remove your listing photos if that is what, say, the buyer would like to do. Sometimes you'll get that request from the buyer at settlement to remove those photos. Beforehand, Bright would not allow us to remove photos. So now you can after closing. Until there's a certain period of time, if you've noticed in Bright, when you close out your transaction, it'll tell you on the side in the listing side of your transaction how many days until you lose control of that listing. I want to believe it's 7. I think it's 7 days. So if within 7 days you want to remove all of those listing photos except for the main photo of the house, you could do that at the request of the buyer.
But you have zero obligation to, and to be honest, this has evolved to the place where most listing agents and brokers, including myself, are reluctant to remove photos just because the buyer, we represented the seller, we were the listing agent. Just because the buyer's asking to have interior photos removed, it's judgment call. And if the buyer pitches their case effectively enough to you as a listing agent that you think you want to accommodate that request, okay, fine, because you're the only one who can do it, listing broker or listing agent. But don't feel obligated. And most listing agents have come to the realization that that's their listing. They spent good money, time marketing that listing. That's a representation of their professionalism. They don't want those photos coming out of there. And appraisers, so other realtors use it, of course. We all use for comp purposes, or we're going through all those photos on recent sales. So when they're gone, that doesn't help buyer agents and doesn't help appraisers, doesn't help the listing agent, to be able to pull it up on their laptop at their next listing appointment and say, this is the one I just sold. So there's reasons why, and if a buyer is saying, I want them out of there, it's like, why? Typically, it's, security. They're worried about what? Where the windows are? Somebody can peek into the bedroom?
Well, a lot of it too now is every listing has floor plans too. So, I mean, you can understand in today's world, as we move into a world that could be more chaotic, right? People want those floor plans removed from their listings, right? So that could be an option too, is just remove those floor plans. It could relieve a lot of stress from a potential buyer.
So, I don't know. This is something you could talk with your buyer, especially if we've seen it in situations where a buyer has an estranged spouse. There's a dynamic in the family or with somebody that they had a restraining order against. That happens. Or sometimes if they're in a top secret kind of job, they think that it's in their best interest to not have the interior photos of the home continue to be out there. Well, first of all, if we take them out of MLS, that doesn't mean that they're out of every website out there in the internet, right? So, anyway.
Well, you could debate this topic all day, right? Did you have a question? I would direct them to Bright MLS. So when you get a request a year after the transaction is concluded, and they want to have photos removed, we can't do it anymore, even at the broker's level, right? So they have to make that request to Bright MLS, and Bright would have to be the one removing them. Before December 10th or after? So they may change their tune a little bit, but okay. Yes, sir. One more question, then we're moving on. Go ahead.
Just for clarity, you're talking about removing bonus throughout the yes to go out. Remain in right.
Yes.
So
Well,
We don't have it. Sorry. Okay.
go ahead.
So I called them like a few weeks ago. My buyers asked for remove the pictures and let's say they can racing from third party like they don't racing, but they will stay on that list.
Gotcha.
That's what I want.
Okay. So they were told that you can suppress them by probably those toggle buttons on whether or not the listing goes out to all the third-party syndicated websites. But the photos still will remain on Bright MLS. Okay. All right. So moving to the next one, which is concession information requirements. So before there was a couple concession or seller subsidy fields in there that were not required to be filled in. They weren't asterisked, so you didn't have to fill them in. So there was starting to become some confusion as to what subsidy goes in. Do I have to put it in? Not. No ambiguity anymore. They're now required. So when you're closing out a listing, it's going to ask you whether or not there were any seller subsidies and what those subsidies were for. Maintenance items, financial, whatever they were for. My understanding is they're still not asking for buyer agent compensation.
It does disclose that seller subsidy can include seller paid buyer broker compensation. Unfortunately, they still haven't broken it out that way. And that's really annoying. It's frustrating. The lawsuit's over. You know, who benefited from it? Mostly the lawyers. I mean, but if you're a listing agent, the point is make sure you put it in there. Put the total, whether there's any buyer closing costs contribution, but the commission or the combined amount. You got to have it in there. Yes.
No.
Yes.
No, it specifically says there's a little hover thing in Bright MLS when you're putting these subsidies in. It says they don't want seller paid buyer agent compensation listed.
I don't
in
care. Check it out. You all check it out.
So
it also says buyer. It says seller contributions can include commission. It says it in there. So there's a conflict in there. And thank you, Bright. Right.
That's for our next meeting with Bright.
We want accurate data. They say they want accurate data.
For further information, wait. All right.
All right. So the question is, do we have meetings with Bright? Yes. We have a broker relations director liaison. Name is Adam Yobst. He's a great guy. He's been in the job for years. We have periodic direct meetings with management, Sarah Mormon, myself, principal brokers, direct access to him, and that will continue. But we also make Bright classes available here, like, I don't know, monthly or something. Check the calendar. Sort of dedicated Samson Properties, Bright MLS training and updates. So don't hesitate to reach out to Bright support, you know.
And then the other change on December 10th was the new office exclusive form and the requirement that goes along with that. So if you're doing an office exclusive, right, you're now required to complete the new form, which here's a microscopic copy here so I could fit it in full screen. But it's in the Samson Sky Slope library as well. So you would have to fill this out, check the appropriate boxes, and guess what? When you go into Bright to add your listing to Office Exclusive, now when you click Office Exclusive, you're required to upload this form
again
into Bright.
This has been ping pong over the last two years.
Right. Well, before there was like a general area that no one could find in the Bright in your profile, you had to go into your profile in Bright and then find your office exclusive tab, then go into there and then upload your document there. Now it's uploaded directly into the listing when you're in Bright MLS under listings and you click the toggle for office exclusive, it'll ask you to upload this form. You can't not upload it. It's required. So this would be the form that needs to be uploaded in there. If you're doing an office exclusive, I recommend you, if you are doing office exclusive, which is required, right? If you're marketing a property within 2 days, right, of marketing a property, you're required to either have it in as office exclusive, coming soon, or active in Bright MLS. So if for some reason you get caught advertising a property, which means could have a for sale sign, you could, whatever. Don't get caught for that $5,000 fine. We've had a couple agents here at Samson get nabbed. Don't be that person. We work too hard for our money, and it's very easy to pop it into Bright MLS.
And take time to read these forms. These forms are not new, but they're updated a little bit. And it's obvious that Bright goes to great lengths to
make our life miserable. Oh, sorry.
That too. But to make a point, and their point is, effectively, think twice about doing office exclusives. Why are you doing an office exclusive?
Right.
And these forms require your client's signature. So I get it. A lot of times they're sent in a stack of forms, digital signature, boom, 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 boom. When you read how these forms read, you're going to think, how many sellers mostly are really going to want to sign off on an office exclusive when it basically says the statistics show that it is not in your best interest most of the time.
It only says in here that a 2025 study found that homes promoted as exclusive took longer to sell and gained no price advantage. So,
and I'm
ready as a seller to sign off on that.
Huh?
I said, I'm ready to sign off on that as a seller. That sounds like great. I'm going to take less money and have it take longer. That's something.
Funny guy.
So,
all right.
So this is the form. Make sure you're in compliance. The other two forms that changed at Bright are the other form that changed. It used to be that universal form. You had to check the appropriate boxes. Now, do my client sign the top or initial or whatever? Now we have a buyer tenant one and we have a seller landlord one. So there's two, right? One for the seller landlord, one for your buyer client.
It's an improvement.
So that is an improvement. They heard us screaming and they helped us, right? So there's two forms, one red, one blue. Blue for buyers, red for sellers, right? Color coded for us. Okay? So those are a couple forms. They are in SkySlope. So when you do a template for buyer or seller, it will automatically populate for you. So just letting you know they changed. If you didn't know, there they are. And that's all I got for you. If there's any questions related to the topics, feel free to ask. Otherwise, if you have questions off camera, feel free. Thanks.